So here we are at long last. I'm not going to ramble on. Let's just get right into this. So this is my study of alternative political views. So why did I decide to make this? Because Sargon did his questions for the alt-right. And I did a video. I had a lot of issues with it. But I think it's kind of an interesting idea. And this is actually something I'd been kind of thinking about for a while. We've never really had a chance to kind of survey the alt-right or just kind of this community in general. No one's ever really tried to study and say, what do people think about these issues? Because you have all these contentious issues like abortion, gay marriage, who's defined as white, etc. And you have what's often a very loud, vocal minority. As we'll see once we get into this, the percentage of people in various areas may not be as high or as low as you think it is. It depends a lot on how vocal they are, and that'll make sense later on. So for the sake of this study, I said alternative political views instead of alt-right for a couple reasons. The first one is a lot of people who are basically alt-right, like my buddy Earl of Grey, don't identify that way necessarily. They would have anti-liberal ideas, but maybe they don't like Richard Spencer, maybe they don't like the general culture of the area. They just don't want to identify as that. Also, there are people in these circles who are not necessarily rightists in the traditional sense, but they might be race realists, they might have some kind of weird things. Also, it's first and foremost, this is kind of a community and a subculture more than a political movement. So it started on Poll. Now, I've never been on 4chan or Poll, to be perfectly honest myself. Never been on. But a lot of it is just the culture, the memes, the manner of speaking, the viral nature of things, all that kind of stuff. You could almost say it's as much a subculture as it is a political movement, and you'll get people who are left-wing, right-wing. As we'll see, the vast majority are right-wing, etc. So this was kind of my attempt to take a bit of a snapshot of it. Now, methodology, I'm going to say, because normally when you're doing a study, there's some kind of sampling procedure. So if you were doing a survey of America or something, you would say, okay, what's the population of each state? You need to get a sample from each state. Like, let's just say you wanted to get 1,000 sample and California is 20% of America's population. You try to get 200 people from California. And then within each state, you'd say, well, males are 60% of California, so we want to get, 120 males from California. So you try to get it to represent the population. That's where you get the plus minus. Is based on your sample size, but in order to say that it's representative, it has to be similar to the population. Now, what we're dealing with here is an online community. We have no idea of the demographic. It's not random, it's self-selective, meaning it's people who come to the specific area. Like, if you have like a poll on CNN.com, they pretend it's representative, but it's not the average person, it's whoever goes to their website. So sometimes those will get posted on Poll or some page, and they'll just spam it. They'll just come in and they'll spam it, and then Trump will get like 80% of the vote, and that doesn't represent America, that represents the CNN viewership and the people who decide to go in and troll them. So I can't give a margin of error for this. It's not randomly sampled. The other issue is there's sampling bias, because there's all these little cells, there's all these little groups and subgroups. It's a very diverse area. So if you go to some areas, it might be more neo-pagan. Some areas, it might be more Christian. It kind of varies depending on where you go in these spheres. So I'm not going to say this is representative in general, but this is at least an interesting study. This is kind of the first attempt I've seen of somebody. I'm sure there's someone I've just missed that I'm trying to look at this. So I did my channel. A couple other people shared it to some other groups, which were kind of more fascist. My friend Earl of Grey posted it. A couple other pages posted it. So I got a fairly decent mix, but once again, this is not representative. So I managed to get 1,500 completed responses, which is a lot. and 780 partial responses. And the survey was conducted between January 18th and 24th online. So let's get into the results. So first and foremost, let's talk about what are the demographics of the alt-right, as it were, or the demographics of the people I surveyed. So unsurprising, we have 97% males. I don't think anybody finds that particularly weird. This is an exceedingly kind of male movement. If anything, in a lot of cases, it's kind of refugees from the various areas like video games and comics that have been taken over by the left that used to kind of be male safe spaces. So that's completely, I think, unsurprising. The movement is almost entirely millennials and Gen Z, which once again is very unsurprising. It's over 50%, 18 to 24. The next largest group is 25 to 34. There's a surprising number of under 18. Now, full disclosure, I put this up a couple days after it started. I made a couple changes as the survey went along, and I'll point those out. So that would probably be a little higher, maybe 10%. So there's kind of people who are a bit older like myself, and there's very few older people. I actually had like 3 age categories I compressed there. So unsurprising, and I was kind of expecting this group is very well educated, especially given how young the people are. So we have 8%, which is some high school. Now, if you notice, that's basically the same as the under 18. So there's always like a 1 or 2% margin of error. You know, people click the wrong thing, people skip. So maybe, once again, also we had the couple days where I didn't have under 18. So I think it's safe to assume we probably don't have any, or maybe 1 or 2 high school dropouts. All of the people here are probably under 18. So we have about a quarter who have high school. So once again, that's kind of interesting. I'm not really sure what to make of that per se. If that's just they haven't gone to university or they're not intending to go to university. Post-secondary. I'm not sure. We have about 7% that go to technical school. So what does technical school mean? This is what I've seen in some other kind of studies. Because I part of why I'm kind of sounding like I know about this is I did a lot of background reading. I dug up all my old political science textbooks because you have to do a course on research methods. So I went back and I reread them, and I went and I looked at like what a lot of big companies do, and I kind of built the survey around that, and I kind of built this around that. And obviously, if you watch my channel, I have some experience analyzing these kind of things. So so technical school means like trades. Like you go to school to be an electrician, a plumber, maybe. I don't know if all engineers go to university or college, but it's basically like something vocational. It's not something that you get a bachelor's for. It's something you get, I think maybe some design things. I think you know what I mean. It's like a trade or a specific vocation. It's specialized training for a job. Some post-secondary. Post-secondary means college, university, something like that. So about a quarter there. About a quarter have post-secondary. So post-secondary, once again, college, university. And another fifth have postgraduate. I have some postgraduate stuff myself. So that would be master's, there's college, there's like extra kind of add-on degrees you can do that you put on top of a bachelor's sometime. That could be a PhD, that could be a master's, that could be maybe you finish a bachelor's in engineering and then you go to technical school or something. I don't know exactly how it works. But if we look at this, we have nearly 3/4, or, well, if we throw that in, we have about 3/4 have some form of post-high school education. So this is a very well-educated young demographic. So I think that's pretty interesting, because a lot of people will say they're kind of knuckle draggers and dumb, but the people in this sector are very well educated compared to the general population. So we have racial and ethnic composition. So this one's also kind of interesting. I think it's very unsurprising. So, of the people who took this, 88% describe themselves as white or European. Once again, I excluded people who didn't answer it. But yeah, it's 88% white or European. 6% put mixed race. Now that's kind of tricky because a lot of people who said that were like, I'm 1/4 Asian, or I'm 1/4 black, or I'm 1/4 Jewish. But I kind of deliberately just had it as a self-identification thing, because some people would say if you're like a quarter Japanese, then that's white enough, and it's kind of a self-identification thing, if you know what I mean, which culture you identify as, what you would put yourself down as. Because I know people who are like 1/8 or 1/16 Jewish, but they identify 100% as being Jewish. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. Other is, there's a couple people who are just like half black, half native, but not very large. Other is everything else, so that's Middle Eastern, East Asian, Southeast Asian, anything that's not white or mixed race. So I don't think that's particularly surprising to anyone. So then we have white subgroup. So this is basically what part of Europe are you from, or are your ancestors from? So there was some controversy on this because I initially didn't have Austria under any group, because I added Central European in later. Now, that was because I wasn't really sure where to put Austria, because they're ethnically German largely, but they often will be put in Central Europe and cluster with the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Croatia, that kind of area. So I initially just didn't put down where they were and was going to let people self-identify. But a couple people asked me to put in Austria under Central European. So this is kind of how I did it. Southern European obviously means Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, anything kind of on the Mediterranean coast. Northwestern European means France, England, Germany, the Low Countries, and Scandinavia. Basically any Germanic or Celtic peoples, and that's generally speaking how I see Northwestern Europe described. France is sometimes cut in half, but I'm trying to get something useful here, because that's kind of the thing. Like, you can put in a billion categories, and that makes it more accurate, but it makes it less useful. So there's kind of a sweet spot between the two. Southeastern European is, once again, Romanian, Serbian, Croatian, that kind of thing. Broadly white means you're mixed. So you might be like half Russian, half Portuguese, or like half Romanian, half Swedish. So you're fully European descendant, but you're not really from any specific area. Eastern Europe is, of course, self-explanatory. So now we have income and employment. So this one's also pretty interesting. So about half are in school or in an apprenticeship or an internship. So they're actively trying to get their career started. And about the same percentage are making under 20K a year. So that's not surprising. It's not a particularly wealthy group. It's pretty poor overall. So what's interesting is only 2% are actually NEETs. So there's this whole stereotype of this community as being NEETs, but only about 2% are. So, like, you're not a NEET if you're in school, or if you're like if you're training to be an electrician, you're not a NEET. If you're employed, you're not a NEET. Some people are employed part-time. Once again, you're at least working for a living. And people who are unemployed and are actively looking for work are not NEETs, in my opinion. So that's kind of interesting. The whole NEET thing seems to be a bit of a cliche. So religion. What religion do you identify most with? This is once again kind of a controversial one. I admit I added in secular pro-religion later because people asked me to. I also changed around. I initially just had other and Protestant in one category, but a bunch of Protestants asked me to change it. So let's go through. So unsurprisingly, Roman Catholicism is the biggest group, being over a third of the respondents. That's not surprising. I've talked to people who have done polls on poll, and it's normally about a third. From my understanding, Catholics are traditionally overrepresented in the far right. And then after that, the next largest groups we have are Protestants and atheists slash agnostics, which is about the same portion. So Protestant would be anyone from like a Protestant group with like a defined doctrine. So that would be Lutheran, Calvinist, Anglican. I even would put Baptist in something with a defined kind of doctrinal and theological structure. Agnostic or atheist is pretty straightforward. Eastern Orthodox is a very vocal minority. They're not that large a percentage. They're just very loud about it. Other Christian is just anything like non-denominational. I just read the Bible. I'm just Christian. Anything that's not like a particular theology. Secular pro-religion is people who say, I'm not Christian, but I believe in Christian values. Or I'm not Christian, but I think Christianity is important for society. So that's kind of where I put that group. Philosophical spirituality is deism, panentheism, perennialism, anything that's not explicitly Christian per se, but is not atheistic. Then we have neo-paganism, which was a very small percentage of the population. Now, an issue was about 1% or 2% of that were atheist pagans, and I wasn't sure where to code atheist paganism, if that should be in paganism or that should be in atheism and agnosticism. I coded it as paganism because I coded agnostic Catholics as Catholic. Secular religion isn't important, meaning you're probably an atheist or agnostic, but it's not really an issue to you. And then Eastern religion, pretty straightforward, including white Shinto. Political ideology. So once again, interesting findings, not particularly surprising though. So traditionalist was monarchist, theocracy, neo-feudalism, anything that kind of like reactionary, NRX, all that kind of stuff, and that's the largest group, and I think that that's pretty unsurprising. Next we have conservative, so that's social conservative, paleo-conservative, classical conservative, just national conservative, all that kind of stuff. So that's the second biggest. Broadly right-winged is for people who don't identify as a particular group, but they might take a couple different aspects, like they might have fascist social policies but libertarian economics. They might have like fascist views of the military but have kind of distributist ideas for the economy. I put myself in this category, if you're wondering, just because I take a mixture of different stuff. So that's pretty straightforward. Fascism, that includes Peronism, Baathism, Italian fascism, that kind of thing. Libertarianism, once again, pretty straightforward. National Socialism, which is, in my understanding, political scientists will often list it separately than fascism because it's fairly different. So I just put it as its own thing, and it's not tiny, but it's not that big. Then we have centrism, liberalism, socialism, and broadly left-winged. And there's a couple others like liberal... Oh, sorry, no, I did have liberal here. There was a couple other smaller ones. I don't even remember what they were, but they weren't enough to merit inclusion. So here we go. So if we look at the total survey, okay, so we have the different groups. Once again, if these kind of look different, like there's a different percentage here, it's because not everybody put their religion. So this is of people who listed a religion. So unsurprisingly, Catholic and Orthodox are pretty much majority traditionalist. I don't think that's surprising. They're both kind of traditionalist forms of Christianity, and it kind of makes sense if your politics and religion would be somewhat similar to one another. You also will have fairly large portions of Protestants and philosophical spirituality, so that's all pretty prominent. Conservatism is particularly popular among Protestants. I imagine that's because how a lot of Southerners who are Baptist or something identify themselves. Fascism is fairly consistent throughout, although once again, fascism and National Socialism are particularly popular among pagans, which I don't think is surprising at all, because that's kind of what that grew out of. So yeah, so fascism is fairly well represented across. Libertarianism is especially popular among agnostic or atheists and secular. Once again, I think that makes sense. Kind of fashy libertarianism goes well with kind of secular ideas. So I think that all makes sense. Also, we have broadly right-winged is a bit bigger in these categories, which is probably, once again, they don't necessarily identify as traditionalists because they aren't religious. So then we have economic ideology. So this was self-defined. So this was people were able to put whatever they wanted down. I just asked them to write me a sentence. Because it's a very broad range of economic ideas. I figured I'd see what I got and I'd code it appropriately rather than trying to come up with a predefined list. So free market was by far the largest group. Free market was anything like the freer the market, the freer the people, Austrian school economics, libertarian economics, conservative economics, minimal regulation, etc. Makes sense. Anything that was basically capitalism with little state involvement. Interventionist capitalism is just the title I came up with. That's anybody who said capitalist economy with protectionism, capitalist economy with regulation, capitalist economy with some protection, some regulation. Basically, it's a mostly private economy with state intervention. Makes sense? So it's once again, these two are somewhat similar, but if people said minimal regulation or people said some or a fair amount of regulation, I put them there. State capitalism is where the government owns some of the major industries. So if people said capitalist economy with most major industry, with major sectors like coal or steel or whatever, nationalized, some sort of, if people said fascist economics, nationalist economics, something like East Asian style economics, like Japan or something, I put them into state capitalism. Traditional economics was anyone who said distributism, decentralized, guild system, things like that, Catholic or Christian economics. So anything kind of in that group. Market socialism was like Chinese style economics, National Socialist economics. So that's where there's a state economy where it's mostly state run, but the market is allowed to allocate resources. Central planning is straightforward. Other was just a couple. I don't even remember what it was, and don't know is don't know. So once again, not particularly surprising. The non-religious groups were much more free market. They tend to be more libertarian. Pagans were not that much more in favor of... So for this one, I just took out the very small groups just so it was easier to read. Pagans were more in favor of market socialism, but they were higher National Socialism and more in favor of state capitalism. So they were substantially more interventionist. Protestants were substantially more free market, which is not surprising just because of where kind of alt-right Protestants tend to come from is the United States, which tends to be more free market. Capitalists were a much more... Catholics and Orthodox tend to cluster fairly close together. Once again, distributism is a Catholic economic philosophy that also appeals a lot to the Orthodox. There's been a lot of kind of exchange of ideas, like a lot of Orthodox social teaching is taken from Catholic social teaching, and some kind of modern ideas on Catholicism and nationality is taken from Orthodoxy, so there is a lot of kind of overlap there. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Not a ton to say. Just trying to keep moving along. So determination of human behavior. So determination of human behavior is what you think makes people do what they do. So you have people in Sargon on one hand who think it's entirely up to the individual, and then you might have someone like Ryan Folk who thinks it's almost entirely racial. So you have a wide range of opinions in between. So I just picked the 5 that I think are the most normally cited. So biological race or ethnicity, straightforward, whether you're white, black, northern, southern European, etc. culture or civilization. Once again, pretty straightforward. Once again, because you can see differences between biologically similar peoples, like Botswana and South Africa are racially very similar, but Botswana is like a developed. It would be a first world country if it didn't have the AIDS problem from Zimbabwe. But you have these two countries next to each other. One's a fifth world, one of the worst countries on earth, and the other is a very well run, developed country. And they're racially kind of the same. And you do see this kind of thing. You see this in Latin America too. So there definitely is a role there. Religion, once again, you have, say, the Chechens, who are, in my view, white, but they're Muslims and they have kind of this primitive tribal culture. Whereas then you have Christians who behave very differently. And there is often a difference in how the two groups behave. Individual personality or values, once again, just how individual people are. And kind of like, I guess you could say maybe like a Napoleon figure. Kind of an objectivist idea that you have these beings who are able to shape the will of history. Who are able to use their wills to shape history. So then we have individual personalities and values, and then socioeconomic class or another economic factor. So most people put down as their first choice, the two largest ones were culture and race, which were pretty much tied for number one. I don't think that's particularly surprising, as those tend to be the two largest groups. Then actually culture does really well in the second group, which also kind of makes sense. Those tend to be the two most cited ones, tend to be biology and culture. And then as you get down, socioeconomic was considered by most people to be fairly unimportant. Individual personality was fairly stable throughout, but once again was tended to be of lower priority. Religion kind of varied, but in general, most people put culture or race, which is unsurprising. So now we have government control of education. So this was kind of something Sargon said, and I thought this would be kind of something interesting to investigate. So I gave people a scale of 1 to 10, and they could pick 1 to 10. So this is how involved you think the state should be in education. 1 being absolutely no involvement, maybe 3 being some kind of voucher system, like providing funding where you can pick your own school. 5 or 6 being kind of what we have now, where you have public and private schools. 10 where they ban all public schools and there's propaganda kind of education. So overall, people were 4.8, which is pretty much right in the middle, which means there's a wide range of views on it, and that's a good thing because that's interesting. So it aligns pretty directly with how much state power these ideologies have. Libertarians want virtually very, very little state involvement of education. We kind of have the more, I guess you could say, moderate ideologies in the middle. And then these are fascism and ATSOC are a lot more state-focused than the other ones. So that's why they kind of get up here. So they want a lot of state involvement. Then by religion, it doesn't really vary that much, interestingly. You have atheist agnostic is a little higher. So is philosophical spirituality and paganism. And it's not really that significant, though, the differences you have here. So then we have, this was another Sargon question that I thought was kind of interesting and was kind of worth exploring. So this is, how discriminated against do you think white people are? So 1 would be white privilege, and 10 would be planned replacement. White people are being replaced, the white genocide meme, kind of. So overall, we got 7.9, basically 8. So basically everybody thought white people face a lot of discrimination. That would also mean hiring discrimination, cultural discrimination, historical revisionism to minimize their role, white guilt, all that kind of stuff. And libertarians and conservatives were the least, whereas basically all NatSocs and fascists put it at max. But once again, pretty much everybody put it very high. religiously speaking, it wasn't. It was once again pretty high all round, with paganism because it being kind of the attempt to make a white ethno religion, and philosophical spirituality being a lot higher. But once again, even because people will say, will say something like, "Oh, Christianity's anti-white," but it's still like 8 out of 10, a very, very high percentile, think that whites are facing demographic displacement. So abortion. So this is kind of one of those perennial issues that always comes up. It's always a big controversy. A lot of people are like, well, we have to have legal abortion. It's not a decided issue. And what this study found was it's a completely decided issue. At least in the people I was able to reach, it's very uncontroversial that it's a bad thing. It's an overwhelming majority are against it. So I admit I did change this, because initially I had it banned in all cases, banned except in the following cases, which were rape, incest, and threat to mother's life. And people said you should change that to an or question, or an and or question rather. So I changed that after the first couple days. So banned in all cases means banned in all cases. It's completely illegal. And a full 30%, which is higher than I thought, said that. 43% said banned in elective cases. So that's just if you're like, I want to have an abortion and there's no specific reason. Maybe economic reasons. Because I'd still consider that elective, because you could put the kid up for adoption. And in the Western world, orphanages aren't really a thing anymore, as far as I know. The fact that they have to adopt kids from overseas, I think kind of shows how much of a dearth there is of adoptable children. So banned in elective cases was about almost half. Once again, very unsurprising. Most people in these circles don't like abortion. Like, we have 75% here who are flat out against it in most cases. Because people who are pro-abortioners are like, well, what about rape, incest, threat to mother's life? I've looked it up. That's like 3% of cases. It's a very, very small percent of cases. It's minuscule. I would be I'm not going to go into my personal views here. So available on request is pro-abortion, and that's an extremely small percentage. So I put different for other racial ethnic groups, because there are a lot of people in these circles who are like, I'm okay if blacks have it, or Muslims, or Hispanics, but not white people. So I put that as an option, because I don't think it's fair to say you're pro-life, but I'm okay if blacks abort their children. I just think that is something that I think it's an important distinction to make. I also think it's an interesting kind of issue to look at. So the Christians were just extremely against it. Like, only 10% of Christians were really pro-abortion at all. Pro-abortion in all cases is like 3%. It's completely, utterly uncontroversial. Once again, I took only like the largest, most interesting categories for this. So Catholics were 90% anti-abortion. Eastern Orthodox were 92% anti-abortion. Protestants were, almost 90%. So for religious people in the alt-right, it's completely uncontroversial. They're virtually all anti-abortion. Even if you get into the other groups, they're still very strongly against it. Philosophical spirituality, 22%. Neo-paganism is still over 50%, generally against abortion. The 35%, as I think people like Varg, I think that's Varg's position, but don't quote me on that. So once again, once you get more non-religious, that's the only group where you see strong support for abortion. But among kind of non-atheists, it's not a controversial topic. So now we have homosexuality, and this is kind of another wedge issue. This is another issue people always bring up as this is a huge controversy, how we deal with homosexuality. So I kind of thought of what are the major views, what are the different tactics that countries take on this. So you have legal and tolerated, with gay marriage to civil unions legal. See, legal makes sense. Legal and tolerated without gay marriage or civil unions. I don't really think I need to go into the descriptions about that. Public displays and promotion are illegal, which is what Russia has. I think some other kind of more conservative countries will have, but they don't really actively pursue gays. They just ban pride parades and promotion in the school system. Illegal but not actively enforced, which is what Singapore and I believe India have, where it's technically illegal, but if they do it in private, nobody cares. And illegal is enforced as if they even hear about it, like in private, they will arrest them and punish them. So once again, it's not particularly controversial aside from the non-religious people. So like only 20, like about a quarter were like semi okay with it. Less than 15% supported gay marriage. This isn't a controversial issue at all. Like 3/4 want it not in public or outright illegal. And once you get into Catholics and Orthodox, it's even higher. It's like 85, 90% are actively anti-gay. Protestants are similar. Neo-pagans and philosophical spiritualism are similar. Even among secular people, even among atheists, you don't get 50% pro-gay marriage, and still about half don't like it. So this is not nearly as controversial as people think it is. Once again, in terms of political views, only 2% of so-called traditionalists support gay marriage or civil unions. Overwhelmingly unpopular among conservatives, fascists, Nat-Socs. None of these people really like it. I guess conservatives like it a little more. Libertarians are majority pro. But in general, in like Nat-Socs, you get 28% who want to actively go after them. So it's not nearly as controversial as people think. So next we have the media. So the media, once again, pretty straightforward. I don't think this is that complicated. We have completely private, no government control of the media, private and regulated. So that's the media is in private hands, but the government can censor, like they block, I don't know, pornography or degeneracy, or they can punish news stations for fake news or something. Then there's a mix of public and private, so that might be something like Canada or Britain or Australia, where you have private news, but you also have a state broadcaster. Completely government controlled, that's pretty straightforward, and don't know. I included don't know because it was fairly high. So this was pretty consistent. There wasn't a huge amount of variation, at least for most of these groups. The differences aren't huge here. Really, the only ones we get is, once again, the non-religious people tend to be a lot more in favor of freedom. Protestants, like I said, they tend to be American. So, yeah. Not surprising. Let's move on. That's funny. 0% of libertarians want government control of the media. That's not surprising at all. Conservatives and broadly right-wing tend to be more free speech. Once again, not surprising. Even Nat-Socs aren't in favor, really, of complete government control of the media. Free speech seems to be fairly important within these circles, at least by and large. So, not a ton to say here, just funny how high libertarians are. It's good to see outliers, because that means I got a pretty good sample. So, state religion. So, anti-religious state, pretty straightforward, kind of like the Soviet Union. Religion is actively repressed. Secular state, that is a state where there's no state religion, and the state doesn't, it's just completely separate from church and state, which is how most Western countries are. State treats religions differently. So, would be the idea is they might make Islam illegal, but not make Christianity illegal, or make Islam illegal and Judaism illegal, not impose any laws against Eastern religions, and give Christianity a preferential treatment. So any system in which there's no state religion, but it's preferential. So then we have state religion with religious toleration. So I said general or specific. So specific could be Catholicism, Orthodoxy, etc. General means just Christianity. You could just say that the religion is Christianity, denomination not specified. There's a number of countries that have Islam, just Islam, not denominational. Or it's not non-denominational Islam, but it's just Islam. So it can be Sunni or Shia. So that tended to be the largest group, and then you had a single state religion that actively persecuted minority faiths. So in most religious groups, the overwhelming majority wants some involvement of the state in religion, and most want the state to take an active role in religion and want a religious society, particularly because virtually no Orthodox or Catholics or Christians want a completely completely secular state. Overall, 4/5 want some aspect of religion to be part of the state. So once again, this is not really a controversial issue outside of non-religious people. This is not particularly surprising. Libertarians want a secular state. Traditionalists, basically 100% are against secularism. Basically 100% of fascists are against secularism. Nazis are against it. Very few people are pro-secular in these circles. Role of women in society. Once again, kind of another contentious topic. We've had a lot of issues with feminism lately and how people feel about it. So, categories are same as men, what we have now. Same as men, but excluded from politics, police, and military. So they can still go to school, they can be doctors, that kind of thing. But they can't vote. They can't hold public office, they can't serve in the police or military. And that tended to be the most popular position. Then we had restricted to unskilled labor, sole duty as homemakers. Now, a lot of other people, because this had an open-ended component, and a lot of people said they should have the same rights, but there should be financial, social, or cultural incentives to be homemakers and have children. Like, that's fair enough, so I made that a category, and then none of the above. So secular people are less socially conservative, but most groups don't have much time for modern feminism. Less than a third of all the other groups wanted the same. A strong plurality want basically, limited participation in society. The Orthodox appear to be especially trad in this category, which is not surprising. So, political ideals. I don't think it's surprising that fascists, Nazis, and trads have absolutely no time for feminism. Once again, this is the overwhelmingly popular position. Nazis have really, really trad views on this topic. So do fascists. Libertarians, once again, are the outlier. So to a certain extent are conservatives. So, that I think was straightforward. Let's move on. So this is ethnic composition of the state. So some people got confused because I said ethnic composition versus cultural composition. So you can have a mono-ethnic state, like Austro-Hungary was a mono-racial state. Everybody was white, but it was extremely multicultural. And you can have a monocultural state, like, I guess to a certain extent what America was or was thought to be, but multiracial. So these things aren't exclusionary. You can also kind of have this pan-white state, which would be multicultural, like the EU, but would be monoracial. So I said, like, on one hand, you have complete, like, zero would be completely non-homogeneous, no homogeneity, completely multiracial, something like Brazil or Singapore. And on the other hand, you have complete monoethnicity, because ethnicity and race are two different things, because there are people in England who don't want the Poles there. Now, the Poles are also white, but they don't want them there. They want it to be English. So I don't know, like 7 or 8 to me would be single race, 9 or 10 would be single ethnicity. So I don't think this is surprising to anyone. Nobody here wants diversity. Nobody likes diversity. They're all basically want a monoracial state. Natsocks and fascists want a mono-ethnic state, is how I view this. So that's completely not controversial. Once again, people give Christians a lot of, like, say that they're globalists, but once again, it's not controversial here. If anything, the least, although even they are like anti-diversity, dislike of diversity extends across all groups, and there's not like a large difference between them. Paganism obviously is the highest, as is Orthodoxy. That's not surprising. They're both kind of ethnic focused religions. But it's not like Catholicism is pro-diversity. Keep in mind, this is 1 to 10. There's normally a lot of variance, because this is a large sample size too, so they gravitate towards the mean. So cultural composition is a little different. So once again, we have monoculture versus multiculture. And this is different than race. There's overlap, but it is rather different. Because, once again, you can have America, which was multi-ethnic, but was monocultural. So you'd have, like, Poles, Irish, Anglos, Dutch, Germans, but they'd all have the same American culture. So, once again, overwhelmingly, no one likes diversity, not even libertarians. So, Natsocks are close to 10. They want absolutely none. So not a lot to say. Once again, there's not a huge difference here. Now, what's interesting is Christians are more anti-multicultural, which I find kind of interesting, whereas pagans are, well, these differences are irrelevant. This is well within the margin of error. Just kind of an interesting finding. It looks larger than it is. The whole difference here is less than 1 point, so we're not even going to try to dissect it. So we have the Jews now. The view of people and the Jews, this is a Sargon question. So the categories I came up with, I thought kind of where the main views people have are, A, they're not different from other ethnic groups. They're just like any other people. B, they're prone to social liberalism and globalism, but in the same way blacks or Hispanics are. They're a minority. Minorities tend to be left-wing. They're not unique in that way. Then we have actively pursuing a borderless and multicultural world. Now, you could say that's just in their self-interest. You could say that's their culture, etc. Then we have they deliberately hate white people or Western civilization, or are trying to destroy it out of revenge or spite. And then this was actually a category that people suggested, that normal Jews aren't involved in any of this, but there's a Jewish elite that is involved with this. And this is actually, there's a lot of basis to this, because like in Israel, you have Likud and the right, who are more represent the working class, and they tend to be Israeli nationalists. And the left vote for the Labour Party, which tend to be more globalists. So that's interesting. So pretty similar across the board. But obviously pagans are more anti-Jewish. But very few people don't think that they're the same as other groups. Virtually no one does. Once again, not surprising, fascists and Natsock tend to be the most anti-Jewish. But once again, across the board, people are pretty sure they're pursuing some kind of globalist agenda. I don't even really know is that even controversial in the mainstream to say that? Because they say that all the time. Once again, this isn't like even a value judgment. This is not supposed to be like propaganda. This is just supposed to be like an honest study. Like, I didn't think any of these categories were particularly loaded. It's not as if I don't know. So, not surprising. Let's move on. On immigration, Sargon had something about this, but I thought this was an interesting category. So, I don't know if people just didn't understand the question, because this kind of goes against the results I got for the how ethnically diverse your society you want to be. So, unrestricted open door immigration, nobody supports that. Skilled means a point system, so you can immigrate from Sudan or Nigeria if you have like a doctorate. Cultural compatibility was basically kind of civic nationalist immigration. So it's like if someone from Jamaica or someone from Venezuela or something had similar values and a similar culture to, and I guess in that case, Britain or Spain, they would be allowed to immigrate there. So my guess is people just didn't understand that. So then we had same racial groups, so that would be like open door to whites, which is what America's policy used to be. Same ethnic group, that's in there because of like the British people who don't want Poles to immigrate. And then no immigration period. So the sweet spot seems to be in they want similar immigrants, but they don't have to be exactly the same. Nat Soccer were a lot more explicit, as was fascist. But other than libertarians and to a certain extent conservatives, no one really wants any kind of diversity brought on by immigration. So the last question I had on the survey was, how do you describe whiteness? Which was something Sargon asked during the debate, and I think it's a legitimate question. Is it a skin color? Is it an identity? Is it cultural? What is it? So this is a word cloud I made with the responses people gave. So we have European is by far the largest. Then we just have whiteness. It's an ethnicity. It's a heritage. It's a descent. It's a phenotype. It's Caucasians. It's a race. It's Western, genetical, Germanic. So kind of all these things. So this is the categories I came up with. So we have whiteness is purely biological. So this is people who said whiteness is being descended from Europe, being genetically European, being of European stock, something like that. If they put something to that effect, I put down that as purely biological. Biological and cultural is European descendant while having Western culture. Or so something like, if people put down European descended and having a strong sense of family and high social trust would be in that category. Makes sense? Biological, cultural, and religious was the answer some people gave, where they said it's being European, having Western civilization, and being Christian. A couple people said being pagan or Christian, but most were Christian. So once again, I think that makes sense. It's a little broader identity. So certain people said only cultural. So regardless of your race or ethnicity, so long as you kind of embody Western values and Western civilization, then you can be white. A New World concept is people who said that it's a social construct, that it's a term used by Euromutts from the New World to describe something that they don't acknowledge within Europe itself. It's an attempt to kind of mash together a bunch of disparate peoples. Then about 4% said something like only Northern Europeans, Slavs aren't white, Mediterraneans aren't white, Finns aren't white, that kind of thing. So basically Northern, Northwestern Europeans, only kind of Germanic peoples are white. And then there was a percentage who said whiteness doesn't exist. So 2/3, overwhelming majority, said it's a mixture of biology and culture. But if we combine these, because these all said biology, it's like 3/4. So 3/4 of people think it is biological. I guess also you could add in Northern European. So 85%, maybe more if you add in New World. Most people think it's biological. So that's kind of the dominant view of it. Culture is kind of a secondary aspect of it. So once again, I think this is a very interesting finding. Make of this what you will. If people want, post in the comment section. I can put up a doc that has all the responses. They're all anonymous, so I don't have any trouble giving it out. If you want me to put up a Google Drive link to a doc that has all the responses for this question, you want to maybe look at them or do something with them, be my guest. So we have paganism, secularism. So, I don't know, there's not anything particular here that's distinct. I guess Christians tend to view Christianity as more of an integral part of whiteness. By group, there's very little distinction. I don't think it's surprising that Natsocs have more of a Nordicist view. But by and large, it's pretty consistent that it's primarily biological, secondary cultural. And that is the study, ladies and gentlemen. I figured we end at a high note. We got my logo here. I got my logo throughout to try to prevent people from stealing this. I will put this up as a PDF. It should be in the description. And that was about an hour exactly. So this study took a lot of time and effort. And yeah, I'm not going to beg for donations, but there's a donation link below. This did cost a bit of money to do, so if you like the study and you want to support me, be my guest. Once again, I didn't do it primarily for the money, but I figured I'd just throw that out there. So I did have to pay for the software and for some other stuff to do this. But I'll put a link to the PDF. So if this study's a big thing, I get lots of views, a lot of feedback, people start talking about this, there's a lot of buzz, then I'll do more. Because this was a lot of fun to do. There's a lot of, I think, interesting insights out of this. If you want me to do additional crosstabs or kind of some supplemental